Um, so welcome to our cake decorating program, Buttercream Basics. My name is Amber Gagliardi. I'm a librarian here at the library, and you all probably received an email from me this afternoon, just giving you the Zoom information. So if you have any questions, you could always reach out to me. If this is your first program, welcome. If you've been to any of our other programs, you may have seen me on Zoom before. So welcome back. We have Danielle Butler here from the Bite Size Bake Shop. She's going to be your instructor and guide you through this process. Just as a reminder, we are on a Zoom meeting, so we can see and hear you. So if you get a phone call in the middle of this program, please be mindful and maybe mute it, or we will all hear what you are saying. So just be mindful of that. If you decide you have to go let the dog out or go somewhere else, you may just want to shut off your camera, unless you want us to see your entire house. That's up to you. But those are just a few helpful tips as we start this program. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Danielle Butler, but I will be here throughout the program. If you have any questions, you could always send me an email or send a message in the chat, and I can answer it that way as
well. Awesome. Thanks, Amber. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well. It was a beautiful day today. It felt a little bit like spring maybe is on its way finally. So I was really excited about the weather. I do miss being in person and teaching and having your patients. The library have been fantastic. We've had some really great programs. We'll get back there eventually, but for right now, Zoom is a good medium to share some knowledge and ask some questions. I tend to speak a little bit fast, so if there's something that you don't hear or you need clarification on, don't hesitate to throw it into the chat or put your little hand up or unmute yourselves and say, wait, Danielle, you have to go back, you are talking too fast. But everybody should have received this instruction sheet that has the materials that you'll need and a few directions to what we're going to talk about tonight. I just wanted to start with a little bit of an overview about frosting in general. So there are two kinds of toppings, right, that we tend to think about when we think about frosting cakes or cupcakes. There's icing, which is a mix of confectioner sugar and some kind of liquid, water, milk, lemon juice, orange juice. The icing is what we would use for like a cinnamon bun or a cookie or a donut. It's more like of a glaze. And then there's frosting, the rich, delicious, buttery, fluffy sometimes, kind of more unctuous, beautiful topping that you could put on a cake or cupcake. So the style of buttercream that we're going to talk about tonight is the simplest of those frostings. This is American buttercream. And American buttercream is simply the mix of butter and confectioner's sugar with a little bit of milk or water. Now, the proportions are a challenge sometimes. So I'm sure you've made buttercream before and you've ended up with either a gross gloppy lump or something that is so thin that you can't frost your cake with it and it just runs over the side. And we're going to talk about ways that you can mitigate both of those problems. But there are two other members of the buttercream family. And as you continue on your journey, jump into testing these recipes. They're really fun and they make for a really delicious frosting. There is the Swiss meringue buttercream, which is a process where you heat egg whites and sugar over a double boiler, and then you whip that until you get some nice stiff peaks, like you were going to make meringue cookies. But then you add the butter, and that's what makes it a buttercream. And you end up with this delicious, stable frosting that you're able to decorate cakes and cupcakes with. It looks really smooth and shiny. So when you're seeing all of those fancy cake decorating videos on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, that's typically they're using a meringue buttercream. Either Swiss, which is the one where you mix the sugar and the butter together and you heat it, or the Swiss, the cousin to the Swiss buttercream is the Italian meringue buttercream. Italian meringue is probably the most difficult of the buttercreams to make. With Italian buttercream, you just melt your sugar and water, and then you stream it into your egg whites as they're whipping. So the egg whites themselves are not warm. So it's a little bit of temperature difference. You have to watch that you don't curdle your egg whites and cook things when you don't want them to. So it's a little bit more trial and error. But again, you end up with this beautiful, shiny, stable meringue buttercream. You add the buttercream at the end, it all gets folded in, and you have this lovely, lovely frosting for your cake. So that is a challenge for you if you want to continue on your buttercream journey to investigate Swiss meringue or Italian meringue buttercream. And let us know how it works out for you. I made my first fancy, I call it fancy frosting for a birthday cake for my cousin, probably about 10 years ago. And it was a lemon Swiss meringue. And I made this beautiful lemon curd, and it was just this cake that was so delicious. Everybody said, Danielle, you really need to open a bakery. And I was like, you're crazy, right? Who would do that? I was a project manager by trade. I was a consultant. I was like, I don't have time for a bakery, but I really loved baking. So I decided to do it on the side, and I opened the Bite Size Bake Shop in 2013. I decided that I liked baking enough that I was going to devote some time and attention and some of my life to it. And I have an amazing husband who is so supportive, and he's like, I guess go ahead, go for it, right? So for a long time, I did both the Bite Size Bake Shop. I sold at the Portchester Farmers Market. I had a local restaurant in town who was carrying my little delicious treats. And now I have a fairly successful online bakery that serves everything. We do everything from cakes and cookies and cupcakes to muffins and breads and special orders. We jumped on the hot chocolate bomb train around the holidays. So we're chocolatiers now too. And sometimes it involves my whole family. My 10-year-old daughter loves to roll up her sleeves and help out melting chocolate and helping to make decorations. So it's a full family affair at this point. But buttercream is where we started, right? So if you can make a good buttercream, you can make anything taste delicious. The buttercream that we're going to do, I mentioned, is just a standard American buttercream. So it's a simple ratio for all of my buttercream, American buttercream recipes. I always start with 1 stick of butter. Now this butter is room temperature and little soft. So if I squish this butter, you see it squishes, but it's not oozing. You don't want to use oozy butter because oozy butter is going to be too soft. So you melted this in the microwave and you have a puddle on your plate. You want to throw that in the refrigerator for a few minutes and let it harden up a little bit, because if it's too soft, your buttercream is going to be too soft and it's going to be liquidy, and you don't want that. But you want it to squish, but not ooze. Can you see that? So I can squish it, but there's no ooze there. So I'm going to open my buttercream. You can do this alongside me at home. And I'm going to put it in my mixer, which is just to the right here of my cake. I use a KitchenAid. I'm going to flip my camera so you can see it. I use a KitchenAid, a 5-quart professional bowl, but you can use a hand mixer, a stand mixer. You could do it by hand. God bless my mother-in-law. She still makes all of her buttercream by hand. So we will go up to visit, and she'll make cake and frosting, and she makes that buttercream by hand. She smashes every tiny little piece of butter and incorporates it all, and it's the most delicious thing. The woman has the patience of a saint. But I have been using this mixer for about 15 years now, and it is a workhorse, but it makes a beautiful buttercream. So I'm going to add 1 stick of butter to my mixing bowl, and I'm going to add 2 cups of powdered sugar. In your packages, you were given pre-measured powdered sugar, and I also added some powdered vanilla. I used a vanilla creamer so that I could give you the vanilla flavor without adding a liquid, because the dry ingredients had to stay at the library for a little while. So it's an interesting idea if you were thinking about flavoring, that you can flavor your buttercream in a variety of ways. So that vanilla creamer that we added to our cake, your powdered sugar, is going to give you a little bit of that vanilla flavor. But there are lots of options when you're thinking about flavors. So you have a variety of extracts. So this is a clear vanilla imitation. I find that, The really good vanilla is amazing, but it's expensive. And so if you wanted to buy the Nielsen Massey really good vanilla extract, go for it. I don't tend to even use that because it's expensive. And I find that the flavor is comparable with some of these less expensive brands. So this one is one that I use a lot. This is Loran, and you can buy these extracts at Walmart or Michael's. They come in a ton of flavors. This one is just the vanilla, and it smells really good. It bakes beautifully. It doesn't taste artificial. And Loran has a ton of different flavors. She has butter. She has raspberry. She has strawberry. You could do coconut. Lots of options. They even sell at Walmart and Michael's these little teeny tiny jars of oil flavors. So this one is pineapple and this one is blueberry. So these are natural flavors. They come in much smaller containers. You'll see them on the rack when you walk into like Michael's in the baking section. If you wanted to just try a flavor, but you didn't want to buy a whole container of it, they have lots of options. I have recently embarked on the journey to make my own vanilla extract. So I have beans here that I am soaking in vodka that they have to sit for about 12 to 18 months. So this is going to be a long process, but I'm really excited about this. This is the first time I've ever done that. But I have some real beans that we're using for our vanilla baked goods. In the past, I would just buy this little tube of vanilla bean paste. Now, vanilla bean paste has, I'm going to squeeze out a little bit so you can see. If you haven't worked with vanilla bean paste, it's simply the caviar from the inside of the vanilla bean that is mixed with sugar. So I don't know if you can see those little brown specks. It's what gives vanilla ice cream those little beautiful black specks when you eat it. I will include vanilla paste in when I make my vanilla cakes and my vanilla buttercream because of the flavor that it imparts into your buttercream. So we'll add the extract. I'll add my extract in a minute, but you already have vanilla powder in yours. So feel free to add more or add a different extract if you want a different flavor. The vanilla I find I add even to a chocolate buttercream because of the kind of the background flavor that vanilla gives. So I'm going to turn off my sound for a minute and I'm going to just start my mixer. So if you all want to mix along, go ahead and do that, okay? All right, so I started the process of mixing my butter and my sugar together. And you'll see that it looks a little crumbly, right? So I will, at this point, stop my mixer and I'm gonna add some of my extract and I'm gonna add some milk. And the milk is gonna give us, it's gonna kind of bring it all together. You wanna start with less milk than you think you'll need. So I have a little bit in a cup here. I'm gonna start with about a teaspoon and it comes together pretty quickly. So I'm going to turn my mixer back on and see how that does, and then we'll check it in just. So you can see as this is mixing, it looks like it's doing its job, right? I'm going to add a little bit more milk because it's not quite the consistency that I want it to be, which is like toothpaste, maybe a little bit looser than toothpaste. And just a little bit of milk at a time. And I'm going to kick up the speed one notch so we're on medium. And gosh, does that smell good? I can smell that vanilla extract. You really wish you had like a smell-o-vision, right? So the buttercream is mixed. I'm going to go ahead and use my scraper to scrape down the bowl and make sure that we have all of those chunks of butter have been incorporated. You don't want whole chunks of butter because will not be good in somebody's mouth, right? If they get a chunk of butter as they're eating your cake, they're going to be like, oh, that's a delicious piece of butter. Now, depending on how much milk you added, your buttercream might be a little on the runny side, or it might be just perfect. So I'm going to put this back on my stand. And I think that my buttercream looks okay from a stiffness perspective. So I'm going to show you over here in the light, a little easier to see, that when you have when you're going for like a medium consistency frosting. So if your frosting was too thin, it would roll off your cake. If the frosting is too thick, you're going to have a really difficult time spreading it. So medium consistency, I find, is the best consistency just for like general working, for your filling, and your kind of crumb coat. And then you can always tighten it up a little bit if you need to for your final coat or any decorations that you might want to buy, design.
Danielle, so could you just move back your pot just a little bit so everyone can see your frosting? Thank you. Perfect.
Yes. So this consistency, see if we pull up our spoon, it kind of holds a little bit of that shape, that fold. It didn't fold back in on itself. So that's going to be a good medium consistency. And I'm just going to give it a little bit more of a stir, make sure that my sides are all scraped down. And that smells really good. And I am tempted to get a spoon and just take a little nibble, but I will restrain myself. The next thing, we're going to set that aside for a second, and we're going to talk about your cake now that our frosting is done. So I have a cake here that I made sure was ready. It's completely cool. This one, it was actually, I had in the freezer, and a little trick before you, I will go through sessions where I have a lot of baking to do, and I try to group my baking days together. Baked goods freeze beautifully. So if I have a lot of baking to do, but I'm not going to use things right away, I will bake them and freeze them. If you freeze them immediately, when they come back up to room temperature, you will never know that they were frozen. And it's a nice way to be able to balance. So my cake I have here is just a little fixin', because that's what I had left over. But with whatever you have at home, the frosting that we made is probably about 1.5 cups of frosting, which should be fine to do your single layer. If you obviously had a bigger cake to do, you would need to double that recipe. But I usually do 1 stick of butter to 2 cups of confectioner sugar. That's my standard ratio. So if I had a double stacked cake to do, I would just double that recipe, and I would use 2 sticks of butter to about 4 cups of powdered sugar, and then adjust your the amount of powdered sugar that you have based on this kind of consistency that you want. Any questions so far? All right, so let's talk about the cake itself, right? So somebody told me once that if you bake your cake in the pan, I always use parchment and I spray with a nonstick spray. But when it immediately upon taking your cake out of the oven, if you cover that cake with another piece of parchment paper and you flatten it with your hand and a towel or a pot holder, but put a piece of parchment paper down first, you will never have to level another cake in your life. And that has been a game changer for me. I haven't cut off a cake top in years since I learned that trick. So you take your cake out of the oven, you have that dome, right? Because that happens sometimes when you bake. You take a piece of parchment paper, you put your parchment paper down, you take your pot holder, and you put your pot holder on top, and then you just press into the top of the cake. And it kind of compacts the cake a little bit, and it will make it a little bit more dense, but it removes the dome. And then you end up with this beautiful flat top that there's nothing to trim. So that for me was one of the things I learned very early on in my baking journey, and it was a game changer. So I'm sharing that all with you. I hope that you find it as useful as I did. To trim a cake, I always use a serrated knife. That's the one with the bumps on the bottom. And I try to use a serrated knife that is bigger than the cake that I'm going to trim. So I have a lot of cakes. This is my standard bread knife. This is great for a small cake, but you can see it in comparison to my cake size. It's just a little bit bigger. So if you are planning to do a lot of cake slicing, there are other tools that you can buy that will slice your cake across the middle. There are stands that you can buy. I don't find that I'm able to get as even a cut when I do that, but I will insert my knife at the halfway point, and then you're going to go halfway through and cut your cake all the way around. I have a turntable here that I'm using. This, I think, is also Wilton, our favorite cake decorator brand. It makes decorating really easy. So if you don't have a turntable, you want to put it on your list of things that you're going to get eventually. The turntable is key for cake decorating. And then your cake is separated, and you have two beautiful pieces, right? I'm just going to set one of them aside, and I sometimes will frost the bottom piece. So I'm just going to switch my pieces because I like the thicker slab to be on the bottom just from a presentation perspective. And I'm going to put it cut side down because I find that it's not as crummy if you put the cut side against your plate, right? So you can put a little bit of icing on the bottom of your plate or board, just a little dollop in the middle. And then I'm going to set it cut side down right on top and push a little bit. That's going to help anchor our cake bottom right to the board. So for frosting, you have a couple of options. I have a variety of tools here. In your kit, you were given a scraper. So that bench scraper that you were given is great for the final coat of icing. I have them in a variety of shapes. This is one I use a lot. I also use this dough cutter as a scraper. This is one of those multi-use tools. We love those in the kitchen. Nobody likes the unitasker, right? So we use this. This is a dough cutter. You could use it to portion out bread. It's got some measurements on the end. So if you are only going to buy one, this is the one I would suggest you get. You can get it at the restaurant supply. I think I paid $3 for this tool. This is one of my favorites. It's metal. So if when you're going to do your final coat of icing, you can heat it. You can run it under warm water, and that will help smooth out your final coat of icing. But there are lots of options for fancy edging and cake scrapers. So this pack came from Walmart or Michael's, has several different comb options so that you can make the different wavy lines if you wanted to. These are all final coat tools. You first need to get the initial coat of icing on your cake. So that's what we're going to call it a crumb coat. And we call that a crumb coat because it helps trap all of the excess crumbs in your cake, and so that you don't see them on your final product, right? So let's talk about how you get the icing from your bowl onto your cake. I'm going to switch back just so you can see my icing again. I have a pastry bag here. I prefer putting my icing into a pastry bag just for the control that it lends me. And we'll talk more about the pastry bag and the tools in our next cake decorating session next week. That's a special one on typing. But just in terms of helping to control the flow and so it doesn't end up all over the place, I take the bag, I fold it over about halfway down, and I create a little pocket for my hand. And I put my thumb and my forefinger right around the bag, and I pull the edge right over. So it gives me a little bit of control. And then I take my spatula, and I'm going to use my thumb to kind of wipe off the buttercream inside the bag. And this way I'm able to fill the bag up, but I folded it over. So when I go like this to pull the bag up, I don't have buttercream all over the end, it's clean, right? So then we're gonna take this bag and we're gonna push the icing all the way down to the end. I got a little bit on the end, I'm gonna wipe that off. Give it a little shake, get that frosting down to the bottom, and then we're gonna twist it. We're gonna twist it shut. Now, when we go to apply our frosting, I always say, pretend you have a lobster claw, and your frosting bag is gonna go in your dominant hand between your thumb and your forefinger, right in that crease, okay? That crease is gonna pinch this knot shut. So if you had a little rubber band or you had one of those fancy bag ties, you could put one of those on. I try to just keep it twisted shut in the crease of my hand. So now those two fingers are gonna stay pretty tight together. And the other three fingers are gonna wrap around the side of your bag, and that's what's gonna push your frosting down to the end. So I'm gonna cut the tip of my bag with a pair of scissors, and depending on how big a hole you cut will control the flow. So if you cut a big hole, it'll come out big and fast. If you cut a small hole, it'll come out slow. I'm gonna go with a medium-sized hole because I don't want it to be too fast, but I don't want it to be a string. So I cut just a round hole like that in the bottom of my bag. There are ways that you can trim your bag. We'll talk about in the next class about trimming your bag in a V. You can make a leaf design. You can trim it with poke holes in the bottom of it. And then I am going to just set my buttercream in the stationary position, and I'm going to spin my turntable. And I'm just going to pipe out a swirl, cover the top of my cake. And I'm going to stop before I get to the end, because when we put the top layer on the cake, it's going to squish the frosting down. And if you've gone all the way to the edge, then you might end up with some overage. This is typically not a problem if you just have buttercream in the middle. But if you were going to add something to your frosting, like a jam or a jelly filling or pudding, you would want to start on the outside and you would build a dam of buttercream. You would put a swirl of buttercream around the edge to prevent that loose filling from spilling over the edge. But because we're all just doing buttercream, we're going to start in the middle and just work our way out. This is my favorite cake decorating tool. This is called an offset spatula. These also you can get at Walmart or Michael's. They come, this is offset, so you see it has a little bit of a curve to it. They do also come in a flat variety. The flat variety is good for scooping, but I really like the control that I have with the offset spatula. So I hold the offset spatula kind of like a pencil. I put my forefinger on the top, and that's going to help control the flow of the icing. And I'm going to just smooth that out all the way around. This is going to be a nice thick layer of icing in the middle. You could certainly do less if you don't like as much icing. You could do, again, something else in the middle if you wanted to add jam or jelly, pudding. Woo! And I just got my spatula on the floor. So we're going to set that one aside, and I'm going to use my regular spatula to finish. With a short cake like this, a short stack, I will take the icing over the side and just do a little rough crumb coat while I have the cake kind of open. And then when I add the second layer, I already have the bottom kind of crumb coated. So you want to make sure that your layer on the inside is nice and neat and even. See, it's kind of even all the way across. And then we're going to take our other piece of cake that we've cut. And again, we're going to put that cut side down so that all of those crumbs are trapped in the buttercream and you're not trying to frost on top of them. So that goes right on top. We have this beautiful little cake. So now we're going to take our frosting bag, and I like to start, you'll see when you add that layer of cake, there's a gap between your cake layer and the frosting layer that you just did. You want to start by filling in that gap. So I'm going to take my piping bag that I filled, twist it shut, keep it twisted, and I'm going to spin a little icing right into that gap, that hole area. So I meet all the way around. And then I'm going to spin a swirl right on top. And this is going to give me a nice crumb coat. So we're going to smooth this all the way out. We're going to make sure that our cake is entirely covered. It doesn't have to be thickly covered, but a nice even coat to trap those crumbs. Because if you wanted to add some decorations on the outside of your cake when you were done, you don't want it to be all looking like it's supposed to be cookies and cream or something. If it is cookies and cream, then you definitely want those little specks. But if you're looking for a beautiful, neat side, you want to trap all of those crumbs in the crumb coat and not in your final layer of frosting. So if your cake is very crumbly, use this opportunity to crumb coat it and then stick it in the fridge so that that icing can harden. It has butter in it. So the butter is going to come back together and solidify, and it will, you'll be able to mold it then, right? We'll add a little bit more powdered sugar if we wanted to. So I'm going to switch back to my bowl. I'm going to show you just thickening up the icing a little bit. So I still have a little bit of frosting left in my piping bag. And I'm going to save this little bit for my crumb coat for the final. I'm going to add just a smidge more from my bowl. And then I'm going to leave some to thicken up a little bit so we can make a pretty design. So I added some of that remaining icing. We're going to save this for our final coat. But I'm going to give my cake a chance to dry first. You can do that in the fridge. You can do it in front of a fan. You just want the butter to have a chance to kind of set up again. I do find in the summertime, I have to keep my air on all the time because sometimes it's hard to keep things solidified. I do teach some baking classes, kids baking classes this past summer. We did it in my backyard because their world was still closed. But in the past, I had taught at the Village Center down in Port Jefferson. But this summer we did it outside. And it was a particular challenge to be kind of baking and mixing outdoors without the benefit of air conditioning. But these are the lessons that we've learned. We had a really good time. And we've continued to think about what are ways that we can continue to share our love of baking with other people, right? And we do what we can. So I'm going to take a little bit more powdered sugar because that's the secret to thickening up our icing. So if we wanted to do anything that requires the icing to hold its shape, we need to make this icing a little bit stiffer. So I have a little bit left in my bowl. I'm going to kind of scrape it together, and I'm going to add just a little bit more icing. If I add a little bit more icing, it will stiffen up a little bit, and it will allow me to pipe it with a tip in a, and hold its shape. There's a couple of cheats that you can do here. If you have meringue powder and you wanted to stiffen up your icing and make sure that it was gonna stay, you can add a little bit of meringue powder to your icing. So that changed the consistency quite a bit. That was maybe a tablespoon more of powdered sugar that I added. I'm gonna add just a smidge more. And some of it is just trial and error and figuring out, what's going to work for you. If you are practicing your piping or you wanted to see what the best consistency was for you, I would encourage you to just put down some parchment paper and pipe on top of the parchment paper. That is what we're going to do next time when we talk about piping skills. It's just practice and figuring out what consistency works. So I would say that this is a little bit thicker than toothpaste. So it's not falling off my spoon, unless I give it a really good shake. But otherwise, it should hold its shape pretty well. Do you see that kind of dangle right there? These are all very professional terms. I hope that you are writing them down. You want to make sure that your icing has a good dangle. All right. So that is a little bit of frosting, and I'm going to just add a smidge of color so that you can see what it looks like when I add it to my cake. How about pink? I like these colors. These are my favorite colors to use. These are Chef Master colors. You can order a little variety pack on Amazon. You could certainly get the Wilton colors. I like these ones that are a squeeze bottle. I find that I have much better control over the amount of color that I'm adding. But you could certainly do, we have used all different kinds of colors. I have the Wilton color jars. I have some powdered color that I use for fondant and chocolate. This Roxy and Rich brand is a little more specialized. If you wanted to work with fondant, you could color your fondant with the powdered colors. There are lots of options out there. But I'm going to add just a smidge of that pink to this frosting so that I can make a little cute border for my cake. And we mix it in. And it's pink. I have two girls here and I have a little boy. But the girls, he doesn't care about colors the way the girls do. So we will make this nice and bright pink for my girls. He just cares that there's going to be cake to eat. So I'm going to take a second piping bag. And into my piping bag, I am going to put a little, let's use a closed star tip. So this one is fun. This is going to make a nice little seashell. This is a Teco 27. A Teco and Wilton are both good brands. You could use tips for, I use them interchangeably. There's lots of similarities. When you're going to cut your bag, you want to put your tip in the bag before you cut it and kind of get an estimate of how far up you want to cut. Because if you cut the hole too big, your tip will fall out and then you wasted the bag, unless you have a coupler to put in there. But then we're just going to add that new frosting right in to the new bag in our tip. So the tip goes in first, then you add your frosting, and then we're going to set that aside, and that's going to be our final decorating. Again, you can use whatever color you wanted. You could definitely do it all in white. That'll look really elegant. We do some naked cakes, which is the kind of, the cake would stay like this. This is a very hot trend right now, is the naked cake. It's basically just a crumb coat with a little fancy icing around the edges. We put some flowers on it. People really like this kind of rustic look. But just those few minutes have given my cake a chance to set up a little bit. And I didn't put it in the freezer. It was just sitting here to my right. We're going to add just a smidge more icing around the outside so I can show you how to use those bench scrapers. So pipe on a little more icing. You want to make sure you go all the way around on the bottom and on the top, and then a little swirl on the top. And then I will take my spatula again and do a little rough cover. And then the bench scraper is going to be our final kind of cover and smoothing. The plastic scrapers that you had in your bag are a great place to start. You can bend them. You can kind of dome the top of your cake if you wanted to. If you had a ball cake that you were doing, those are really popular. If you were going to do a doll cake with a princess gown, being able to smooth out your icing makes it look beautiful. So I'm just going to smooth up and cover my cake. All right, so that's a good rough cover. And then I'm going to take my scraper, the metal, I have this metal one. And the trick to using a scraper is you want to turn your decorator table once, right? So I always try to put my hand at about 12 o'clock And then I'm going to turn the decorating table counterclockwise, but my scraper is going to go in a clockwise direction. That makes sense. So I'm going to put my hands at 12 o'clock, my scraper at 12 o'clock. Then my scraper is going to go toward 1, 2 o'clock, and I'm going to turn the board, the table in the other direction. And if you go all the way around without lifting your scraper, you'll end up with extra frosting on your scraper, and you'll have some extra, you'll have a nice smooth exterior. So I'm going to go put that back on because I had some spots that seemed like there was a little, the frosting was a little white. I'm just going to do that again. Any questions while we're working through this? I don't see many takes, so I'm not sure if you guys are doing this along with me. If you have questions, feel free to chime in. Again, so we're going to put our hand, it took me a long time to learn. You're going to put your hand at 12. Because if you go in short little bursts like this, you end up with all these lines when you're trying to have a smooth edge. We don't want that. So you start at 12 o'clock, and then you're going to drag your scraper is going to kind of be on the end of your perpendicular to your cake all the way around. And then you end up with this nice, beautiful, smooth edge. Now it might be kind of ridgy on the top. This is a time where you could put this in the fridge and you can let that set. You could come along with your spatula or your offset and you just smooth it in. Just along the edge and turn your cake and just smooth that edge right in. So I made that pretty pink frosting. I'm going to show you just to finish the edge. This one has the closed star tip. So I'm just going to take my cake. I usually, again, will start in the back. And let's see. Maybe I'll do it on top to be able to see that. So I'm going to put my tip at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to push out a little bit of frosting, and I'm going to come down. So you're going to go up and down and up and down. And it makes like that little pretty wave. So we're going to go up and down, up and down. So you're going to build like a hump, and then you're like the wave is receding. So you come forward and then you pull it back. You come forward and you pull it back. And you do that all the way around. And you can go pretty fast when you've gotten the hang of it. And you end up with this pretty little ruffle. The turntable is nice because it lets you not have to move your cake. And then you end up with this beautiful little edge. You could do one on the bottom. You could do a design on the top. I might just make a heart. This closed star tip will have these are little ridges in your frosting. If you want that, that's fine. You can also come along with your spatula and just smooth those out so that you don't have the ridges in your design. If I were going to type words, I would even make the buttercream a little bit stiffer so you had better control over the letters. But you want to aim for at least toothpaste kind of consistency in order to hold its shape. So that is our finished product, our beautiful buttercream single layer cake. Any questions? Does anybody have a cake that they did alongside that they want to show us? It's okay if you didn't. I will encourage you to visit us on Facebook. We are the Bite Size Bake Shop. We do have a fairly active Facebook page. We try to keep new things posted. We have some specials going right now for St. Patrick's Day. We have some smash bombs and some stout cupcakes with dairy buttercream after this edition. If you want to play around with alcohol flavorings, you can certainly do that. And then our Instagram page is at @the_bite size bake shop, all one word. And that is where you can find us on Instagram as well. I don't know if there are.
Does anyone have a cake to show us? Did anyone make a cake tonight? Danielle's looks beautiful. So
Well, I wish you were all here to have some. My son is very excited about the cake opportunity. So
yes,
is my
I would
daughter.
love a
She
piece
was
of
trying
that
to steal
cake.
it before.
I see a couple people had their mixers out and were making frosting or the buttercream. But I guess nobody is going to show us their beautiful cake, or perhaps you're still working on it. I see Lori was working, but you're muted. But no final product, Lori.
Oh, wait,
We have a cake.
Progress.
We have a
Nice
cake.
There you
job.
go. Sort of, kind of.
That was fantastic.
Oh, let me see. I'm going to spotlight you. I don't know who you are because you don't have your name. but-
Sorry. It's my work email. We're Kelly and Pat. We're trying. We had a little challenge.
Kelly,
What was it?
We put time.
There we are. Did I lose you? Uh-oh.
no, we have you. Hi, Kelly. You guys look like you're having fun.
Well, this is the cleaned up version. We had a little issue. The dog enjoyed the mess on the floor.
He was very happy. Cooper said more classes.
What happened to your cake?
Well, let's just leave it to our imaginations.
Oh, okay.
Some things are best not told.
Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
This is why we need the classes back in the library,
We can't do
okay?
this.
This at home isn't hacking it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. This has been fun.
Okay, we need to get you guys back in here. All right. Okay.
Are
All
you
right,
using salted or unsalted butter?
Say that one more time.
Are you using salted or unsalted butter in your
Good question.
frosting?
Yeah, I always use salted. This is my personal taste preference. There are a lot of bakers that say use unsalted butter and you can control the salt that way. But I find that sometimes when you add salt to frosting, it doesn't dissolve. And then you end up with these grains of, undissolved salt. And that for me doesn't taste good. So I start with salted butter and I find that I can adjust the flavor with extract if I need to, but then I don't need to touch the saltiness. I bake with all salted butter as well. So all of my recipes, all of my baking is all with salted butter. And that's, I think that's a personal preference more than anything else. But I think that salt is, it's okay. A little things, right? Little bits. I won't usually
Thank
add
you.
extra.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Michelle and Lily say they are still working on theirs. So Michelle, you are going to have to send me a picture of yours after because I have to see, and I know you have a helper. So that's always fun when you can bake with somebody. And she'll share the picture. So that's great. Okay. Anyone else? I just want to give everyone else a chance. If you're still working on it, Donna, you got something to show us?
I don't know how I could do it.
Oh, you just tilt your camera.
I'm terrible.
If you have a computer, just pull.
Yeah.
Just pull your
No,
screen
hold on.
down.
Let's
If you're
see.
on a laptop. Ooh,
Perfect.
It's a
Ooh,
little crooked.
wow.
That's okay. Crooked is okay. That was fantastic.
I tried.
You did
Donna,
a good
that
job, Donna.
Great.
Good job.
And I love your all those sprinkles on top.
Yeah.
It looks delicious.
Thank you.
My kids would like that cake for sure. They love all the sprinkles. I could take them or leave them, but they love the sprinkles. So everything in my life is full of the sprinkles and candy. So
Yeah, you can never have too many sprinkles. I have a whole shelf in
Oh,
my basement.
I
Just
see another
sprinkles
cake
and
coming. Okay.
Prada.
Okay, we have a cake. Oh, wow.
Let's see.
Mm.
Migdala, your cake, I can see it.
Is it a hot cake?
You're just muted, but we do have your cake. It looks wonderful. Good job.
I like it. So what are the biggest challenges that you guys have had in your kitchen? Do you have a second to share? What are your biggest problems that you've had as a home baker? My 10-year-old says the biggest problem is waiting to eat it. She's here in the back, kind of off screen, but she says that patience. Having patience is the hardest part. I agree, Molly. Are there other problems that you've encountered or things that you wonder, like what would happen if? We have a lot of mistakes that get eaten. Don't think that it all works out as nicely as this every time, because it certainly doesn't. But I would encourage you to keep trying.
Yeah, my biggest challenge has always been time.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
you always need a cake while you're throwing a party. And then you have so many other things to do, like clean the house, cook all the other food, and then you're like, oh my goodness, the cake. So that's my challenge all the time. And I've tried to quickly put together a cake, and it turns out to be a disaster because it takes time.
It
You
does.
cannot rush it.
It does. But, the timing issue, that's why I tend to try to do all of my baking together, so that it requires a certain amount of organization to know what orders I have for the week. And then I can do all of the baking so that I know that it's done. And then I will have several cakes that I have to decorate all at the same time. But having them all baked and cooled, and not trying to bake a warm cake. Has anybody ever tried to put icing on a warm cake? Because I totally have. And It's really difficult. There's only so much the freezer can help with if your cake isn't completely cool.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's definitely a challenge. Anybody else? Questions? Suggestions? Can I ask what you all thought about this program? Honestly, this is the first large group demonstration that I've done. I've done some one-on-ones, so I would be interested in your opinions about how this went. Were there things that you think could have been done differently? I'm definitely open to making some changes for the next time. Are there things you wish you would have seen or done differently? I would have done differently.
I like how you gave us tips on like tools we could use, because I think I'm overwhelmed when I go into Michael's and other places because there's so many tools you can get. So I really
Absolutely.
like the fact that you highlighted a few good ones. I think that's very helpful because you can spend tons of money on this, and I don't think it's necessary to have all the fancy stuff. So
Absolutely. And sometimes, you don't need the fancy stuff. That sometimes that more inexpensive, the better. I find that the rolling pin that I like to use the most is a piece of PVC pipe that I had cut to about a 12-inch length, and it's easy to hold in my hands, and it's easy to roll, and it's a good weight, and I don't have to, mess with the wood and the stuff getting stuck to it. It slides right off. So there's lots of ways to make accommodations for what you have in your kitchen. And I have rolled out with wine bottles because I couldn't find my rolling pin. But there are lots of ways to make it work.
I do invite anyone who wants to fulfill Danielle's request, and you can always email me something you would like to see for next week or the week after, or just in general, to give us feedback. So feel free to respond to my email I sent out reminding you about this program if you don't want to let us know in person or on camera. We're not in person. So feel free to do that.
Awesome. Well, I hope you all had a good time tonight and that you have a delicious cake to eat as a result of your efforts. I applaud you for baking alongside. I think that can be a little bit of a challenge. And I think it's...
Okay, I hope everyone has a good night. Oh, go ahead. Next week, same time, 7 o'clock. It is a different link, so I will email that to everyone, but it is different. You can also find it in the program record, so it's not the same link. So just note that. And we'll see everybody at 7 o'clock next Tuesday. Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
You too.
Everybody.
Thank
Good night.